Welcome back, everyone. I want to introduce you now to the Executive Corporate Part 135 Flight Department Working Group and the lead as well. In fact, I'll start off now talking about the working group lead, Randy Brooks. He comes very seasoned aviator, comes from a wide background, corporate pilot, air show pilot for many years as well. He had a unique position at Eclipse Aviation, where he's the manager of emergency situation training, where he taught UPRT in the L-39. He was director of customer training and did production flight tests as well. He's been a full-time UPRT instructor for the last 16 years and trained over 1,500 students. It was his participation in the industry where we met many years ago, specifically the FAA Stall Stick Pusher Working Group. And he's just been awesome to work with, and he's such a great voice in the industry. He speaks very clearly and has a full grasp of the issues at play here. So, Randy, I'm glad you're here. I'm going to let you take it away as you talk about your group.
Thank you very much, Otter. All right, the other folks that are working with me, we've got a nice lineup of strong participants. Ben Zimmer's with Kiewit Corporation or Midwest Aviation, and he's the training manager. With Richardson Aviation, we have both Brandon Williams and Kyle Zahorsky. Brandon is their safety lead, and Kyle is the training lead for Richardson Aviation. And Etienne Cote from Bombardier is their chief pilot for demonstration purposes, and all of them have contributed to what we're going to be talking about here. Now, I'm going to begin with the situation as it exists today, and if anybody wants to copy down the NTSB U.S. Civil Aviation Accident Dashboard, you can go, it will bring you up this website, and it has a lot of different filters that you can manipulate. And the two pictures that I have provided here are from the Part 135 non-scheduled world, and from the general aviation side, the business executive corporate groups in terms of use, but all 50 states, and this is the best data that we have, even though it's not international, based strictly on the US. But we see something that should be alarming. Now, I know everybody that's looking at these two graphs can be divided into two camps, those that have seen it before and those that may be seeing this data for the first time. If you have seen this data before, maybe over a period of years as I have, you may become a little bit used to it and used to the fact that the red bars and the long bars at the top of these graphs represent loss of control in flight in the two areas that are depicted for Part 135 and general aviation, business executive corporate. What I need you to do, if you've seen these before, is to not think about red bars. What I need you to think about is people, because those red bars are representing fatal accidents. And those fatal accidents are talking about parents that didn't come home to their children and children that no longer had another birthday. And if you are in the group that has not seen these accident statistics before, you should be asking yourself, how can that possibly be that these statistics have been this way, that this picture has looked like this for years and we have not done anything about it? And that's the beauty and the importance of UPRTA, is that we have an opportunity to address this. So let's begin by looking at the existing condition, the situation as we've just seen, with loss of control in flight being the leading cause of fatal accidents and fatalities in general aviation and executive business corporate categories based on those NTSB statistics. Now, I was showing you a snapshot of 2008 to 2023, 16-year period, but you can look at subsets. You can break it up by rotorcraft, fixed wing, by turboprop or turboshaft, and you're still going to get that same picture. Now, of those causal factors that we looked at, only one, controlled flight into terrain, has a higher percentage of fatalities than loss of control in flight. So for our brothers and sisters in the SMS working groups, in their terminology, this would be catastrophic. The fatalities are high in this area. And in the US, 121 carriers, the airlines, have been required to do upset prevention and recovery training beginning in March of 2020. Now, that's not the case in this sector of aviation, despite the fact that we have much greater vulnerability in the business and corporate area because of the highly variable locations and working conditions and hours that we can have in those sectors of aviation. So let's take a look at what recommendations are out there. For a lot of people, this is a fairly new subject, but what we're going to talk about first here is the FAA recommendations that were provided to the FAA by a loss of control in flight aviation rulemaking committee. The Aviation Rulemaking Committee's name was the Loss of Control Avoidance and Recovery Training Arc, and it was actually the second of two arcs that were convened after Colgan 3407. The first one was looking at stick pushers and adverse weather, but after they realized that the problem was not stick pushers, it was not adverse weather, that arc was reconstituted as the LOC-I arc, and they came up with 7 recommendations, one of which was to provide UPRT-specific training in actual flight, and those were the words they chose to use to differentiate it from a simulation at the commercial pilot licensing level. Now, our ICAO international documents, their document 111, which is the Airplane Upset Prevention and Recovery Training Manual, said that they adopted those recommendations from the LOC-I arc and added that all instructors assigned to provide training in a UPRT program should successfully complete a UPRT instructor qualification training course approved by the licensing authority. And this is much the way we would approve an instructor to teach instruments, to teach multi-engine flight. This is what ICAO recommended. All right, let's take a look at the NTSB recommendations. They have been making a variety of recommendations since 1968 involving improvements to unusual attitude training and training for pilots outside of the normal envelope. And IATA, although that is an airline-oriented organization, recommends the use of on-aircraft training even for simulator instructors to provide the missing human factors that they know are so essential in delivering proper upset prevention and recovery training. Now let's look, we've seen the situation as it is, we've seen the recommendations. Now let's look, based on the inputs from our working group members, at the existing flight department training. Typical Part 142 recurrent training requires unusual attitudes and recovery during the approach to stall or first indication of stall. The scenarios are predictable. A lot of times they're repeated every 6 months or a year when people go back to training, and they're missing the essential human factors elements such as startle, load factor, cognitive workload, or even pilots working together in crew resource management. Very few operators conduct structured, devoted, simulator-based or on-aircraft upset prevention recovery training, and almost none include the dedicated academics that inform pilots about the difference in aerodynamics outside of the normal envelope where we normally fly. The sector's UPRT adoption is minimal. Comprehensive training remains an exception rather than the norm, leaving a clear gap between what we just saw was recommended by the authorities and the guidance provided versus what's really happening. So, and then the folks that are doing upset prevention recovery training, whether in the simulator or the aircraft, are not always doing recurrent training, which we as aviators are very familiar with when we're talking about perishable skills. And clearly upset recovery training is not something that we're using on a normal and daily basis, so recurrent training is appropriate. All right, let's take a look at our recommendations based on the situation in terms of the statistics, recommendations, and the situation as it is. Well, we agree with the LOC-I arc, the group that the FAA convened to look at this, that pilots should receive upset prevention and recovery training in alignment with the principles of the Every Pilot in Control Solutions standard, which talks about specifically how that training should be delivered. For ATP-rated pilots, recurrent UPRT training should be used to refresh pilots' skill at intervals, as in the Part 121 world. Big thing is to treat loss of control in flight as an SMS hazard in the corporate 135 operational world, and align the mitigation with established UPRT standards, such as EPIC S2, with properly qualified instructors, integrated academic simulator, on-aircraft training, and recurrent training. And then for equipped operators, build a FOQA program that works on SMS principles and begins to study those kind of things, such as stick pusher engagements, overspeeds, underspeed, automation mismanagement, that can lead to loss of control in flight, so that we can improve our database and fold that back into the training that we're providing people and making it more realistic and productive. All right, our goals for 2026, in alignment to what Otter shared for the flight department team, is first of all to collaborate with the folks in the working groups for SMS and general aviation, because we saw areas of overlap. So that's something that we're going to do as we go along. We're going to work to establish pilot entrance into the field of flight department, business, and corporate aviation, who arrive with established UPRT proficiency in place. That is, that they have received appropriate and effective UPRT at the licensing level. And to publish a scalable flight department ready UPRT implementation guide by 2026 that includes cost model, insurance considerations, instructor qualification standards, recommended recurrence, cadence, and other factors, promoting the ease of adoption of UPRT. There are a lot of people that are out there doing this, may not be the norm, but we want them to share their experience with others to make entrance into the field easier. Publish the ICAO-defined minimum simulator instructor qualification standards and make sure that those are used at Part 142 and other training by other training providers, to make sure that the best practices that have already been vetted and agreed upon internationally are actually being put to use. And then to launch an industry survey that's going to help us to determine some of the things that we wanted to know in preparing for this year's Safety Summit. One is, what is the actual rate of participation? How many flight departments out there are actually doing UPRT above the regulatory minimum? And secondly, to get some indication of their views on the loss of control in flight threat, because we want to better understand the lack of adoption of UPRT that UPRTA is going to advocate, and determine the misconceptions or fallacies that might be leading to that, just to better increase our awareness and information campaigns. So with that, we hope to meet the goals that Otter laid out for the flight department team as a whole. I've provided my contact information at the bottom of this slide, and we look forward to your questions that will just help UPRTA better serve you and help to mitigate the threat of loss of control in flight. I thank you all for your time.